What's really good, everybody? This is Nathan Allebach, and welcome to the podcast where we get into people's stories and go down a bunch of rabbit holes about what's really good in the world. For today's episode, I had the honor of chatting with the one and only Daniele Bolelli. Daniele is an Italian author, professor, and martial artist who has been featured on the Joe Rogan Experience multiple times and has done shows with figures like Dan Carlin, Michael Brooks, Duncan Trussell, and just a ton more fascinating people. He also hosts the History on Fire podcast, where he takes deep dives into some of the craziest stories that you probably weren't taught in history class. And on top of that, he hosts the Drunken Taoist podcast, which is more based on current events, martial arts, and just cultural conversations at large that matter. Daniele's most recent book, Not Afraid, is available on Amazon, which is the story of him making his way through just absolute chaos in the event of losing his wife, then losing his house and job, and being left to care for his 19-month-old daughter, which we get into a bit toward the beginning of the episode. We recorded this past Friday, so we started off by touching on the tragedy of Anthony Bourdain's suicide and just the overall state of mental health in our country right now. We also got into the topic of public intellectuals via the quote-unquote intellectual dark web, which is really hot in the media right now. And from there, we talked about how important it is as a society to start focusing more on passion and solutions versus these traps of tribalism and victimhood and just putting the blame for everything on everybody else but ourselves and our own teams. I've been a fan of Daniele's work for years. He's one of the few voices out there who's not only making incredible off-the-wall content, but he's constantly critically evaluating everything in our culture while also staying open to learning from those who are different from himself. So with all that said, I really hope you enjoy our conversation. Now let's get into what's really good. Daniele, thanks so much for coming on the podcast.
Of course, man. My pleasure. Thanks you for having me.
Awesome. So with all you do, I mean, there's a million ways we could take this thing off the jump, but I figured just since it's topical, we could start with the tragic news that happened today with Anthony Bourdain's suicide. So do you want to jump into that with any initial thoughts just on the topic of suicide or his life in general?
Sure. I mean, it really sucks because he seems like somebody who was on the rebound. And again, of course, all of this is from the outside. So who the hell knows what's going on inside? But, if you look at the trajectory of where he was going, he looked like he was coming from heavy drug addiction, but he was cleaning up. He became a jiu-jitsu fanatic. So he was now in killer good shape. He dropped the drugs dramatically. His body, everything looked better, right? New relationship, everything looked like he was on the upside. But of course, that's from the outside. We don't know what the guy was going through inside. And so that's why, to me, everybody was making calls about, people who do this are, and I'm filling the blanks, whatever it is that they have to say, you just don't know. You have no idea what it means to be that guy. Now, the part that does freak me out, and that one, again, I'm not judging, but I really don't get it, he had an 11-year-old daughter. I can only imagine where his mental space must be to feel that even that's not strong enough of a hook to want to keep you around. That's something that's a powerful thing, man. It's like you want to be around for your kids. You want to be around for small kids. You don't want to do that ever to your kids. So for somebody to, and again, I'm not saying, then it means the guy sucks. He's a horrible human being. Who the hell knows? Maybe but the point is, whatever it is that he was going through must have been pretty insane, because it's not a decision that you make lightly to take your own life. Second, to take your own life when you leave behind an 11-year-old girl.
Yeah.
That's heavy.
Well, yeah, that's kind of why I wanted to just jump in with that. I mean, not just because it's topical, but I mean, I know you've spoken pretty candidly over the years from your last book, Not Afraid, just the whole story of how you lost your wife and have since had to raise your daughter as a single parent. So do you kind of want to get into the backstory of that a little bit so people are aware and just maybe cover some of like the most prevalent challenges that you faced mentally and kind of how you relate to this whole topic at large?
Sure. When my daughter was born, she's about to turn 9 now, and when she was about 1 year old, my wife started getting sick, and about 6 months, she died from a brain tumor. So, you have losing your wife sucks. That's bad enough already. Losing your wife and you have a 19-month-old girl to raise, that's pretty heavy. At the same time, because our current financial situation was predicated on 2 incomes, when suddenly it was just down to me, it's very difficult to be able to keep the house we were in. So, losing my house, my wife was dead, I was raising a baby. My career, where I thought it was going to be, came to a crashing halt. Like I just really slammed into a wall with something I thought was going to turn everything from the best. Actually, things started getting worse. So, yeah, it was a pretty heavy period. The whole period was... and I have no idea how I would have handled it it's like, had I not had my daughter, it would have probably been easier from a practical standpoint, but it would have probably been a lot harder from an emotional standpoint.
Yeah.
Because I would have had the time to sit around and mope about how life sucks. Whereas with a 19-month-old baby, I did not have that option. It was just like, well, it doesn't really matter what you are feeling or how miserable you are or this or that. You got a 19-month-old baby to raise. Not just raise, like change diapers and take care of stuff, also make her happy, which at a time when life is not particularly happy, having to figure out a way to make it happy wasn't the easiest thing. But at the same time, I think it was good for me because I had to remember for her, which of course then meant I had to remember for myself, what it was that made it worth it, that made it good. What good things can we laugh about in a scenario in which there's really not much to laugh about? So that's helpful for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, it's kind of this weird mix-up where you have people with clinical depression and then you have people that go through depressions from tragic events. So, like, with this whole experience that you went through, did you feel at any point, like, were you in talks with doctors or therapists? Like, did you feel this clinical dark cloud following you around? Like, were you ever teetering on suicidal thoughts, or was it more just like an overwhelming somberness that you just couldn't get past? Like, can you kind of just like get into that a little bit and describe it? Because I think most people are pretty just not detached, but they don't. If you've never experienced depression, it's kind of hard to understand how it operates.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like you feel into this. It's very much like quicksand. You feel stuck, and efforts to move feel like it's hard to move. And sometimes the more you move, the more you sink. So you feel. And it's weird because, external circumstances, okay, they're out there. You still have your mind. When your own mind is your enemy and your own mind is taking you to places where they are stupid places. They are places that don't make rational sense, or they're places that are clearly not healthy. And yet there's nothing you can do about it because, that voice that's telling you, yeah, this is not helping. This is not a good path to go down. You still hear it. And yet you are their own and you don't feel the power to be able to stop it. That really sucks because you feel that you're going crazy. You feel that if you can't even rely on your mind, that's pretty bad.
Yeah, and I think that's how a lot of people relate to it too, like as if it's this sort of almost like a mental battle. Like there's this sort of, I think, mindset for a lot of people who are really mentally strong, who they go through hard times, they look at depression or suicide through this lens that, you can overcome anything. All you got to do is eat good and exercise and take care of yourself, and then you're going to get through it. Whereas, when you look at the life of Anthony Bourdain, like you were saying, he was out of his addiction, at least as far as we know, and he's living this super successful life, and he's getting into jiu-jitsu. I'm pretty sure he was like a blue or a purple belt at that point, and he's doing all this stuff, taking care of himself, and this still overtook him. So I think that's really, it throws a wrench in what a lot of people, I think, perceive to be this sort of box we like to categorize depression in.
Well, yeah, because it did look, and again, this is completely from the outside, so who knows what was really going on. But from the outside, it does look like he was doing all the right stuff. And so, it's easy if somebody's doing the wrong stuff to say, well, I mean, if you just tried this. In his case, it really did look like he was doing the right stuff. So then again, who knows? Because maybe you are doing the right stuff, but I mean, his girlfriend, Daisy Argento, was at the center of the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal and stuff. So who knows how that affected him? Who knows, really? I mean, again, we see some definite good steps he's taking. But, on a day-to-day level, who knows what was going on to throw him over the edge. But yeah, it's tricky, man. It's like, in my case, it would go in waves. Mm-hmm. I would have weeks, sometimes months, where I would definitely feel this heaviness just hanging, really holding me back, really pushing me down. And then, boom, finally I would come up for air, and that would be a few weeks or months where I'm like, okay, I'm good now. I'm good again. And then I would go again. And then, so I kind of went through these cycles. It wasn't like a 24/7 all year long thing. It was usually weeks at the time. And then even in those weeks you find your moments, the quick moments where you get out for a little bit. One case that it happened to me was the fact that because I was thoroughly repressing a lot of emotions, I started somatizing a lot of stuff. So I started getting a lot of physical symptoms that, they were real, but they were obviously caused by emotions. They weren't just like, you drop a hammer on your foot and, okay, your bone broke. It was emotional stuff that was creating all these physical problems. And which, of course, then compounds the mental stuff, because now you are dealing with health issues that make it harder to have a positive mental reaction. And so it becomes that vicious cycle.
Yeah, I think it's really important to look at all this, that it's a sliding scale. And it's really hard, like you've been saying, to judge it from the outside looking in at any one person, because that's what everybody wants to do. Like looking at Twitter today, it's just been a hellscape of people making assumptions and trying to play armchair psychologist and make all these statements about depression as if it's like a one-size-fits-all thing. But I think, to your point, there's certain people in certain circumstances that can go through a depression like this, and if you give them the tools to exercise, to eat better, to surround them with good friends and family and community, and give them goals to have and all that, there's people who can take those set of circumstances and come out the other side like a completely new person. Yep. But then on the complete opposite end of that spectrum, you have people who do all those same steps, but this, like you said, this sort of darkness, this heavy cloud is just continuing to follow them around no matter what they do. And it's like a day-to-day battle for them where just staying alive is a challenge. And it's really... It's so hard to judge from the outside looking in because, like you're saying to me, it's just imagining like he left his kid behind, and it's such a weird, like I think our human gut instinct, like our biological instinct, is to judge that as poor parenting. We look at that and it's just like, what did this guy do? He's being selfish. He took his own life, but it's so hard to say that, I guess, without being in his shoes biologically, because we just have no idea what it was like inside.
Absolutely. That's why to me, like, that really strike me as such a weird thing, because it's like probably is the one thing I'm most afraid of is the idea of leaving a young child by them. That's like freak the hell out of me. So I would do anything in the universe to avoid that scenario.
Yeah,
I'm not him. I don't live in that body. I don't live with that mind. I don't know what it's like. And so I think it's always, ultimately, people want to come to some kind of a conclusion that make them feel better about their own path. The reality is you don't know what somebody else's path is. And there are things that definitely you can do. And it's clearly those are the steps that everybody should try. And, there are some things that they are definitely not going to hurt you. And if anything, they can only help. Like, for example, exercise. That's great. Well, Bourdain was doing it a lot. I mean, He changed his body radically in the last few years for the better. And with that, he say he dropped a lot, like he was on a lot of drugs. He cut that dramatically. He was clearly doing a lot of great things. Sometimes not enough. Sometimes it's that's why it's impossible for any other human being to judge. Which is why to me it's like you don't judge that stuff because you don't know. Worry about yourself. Worry about your path. And if you happen to never be able to understand where the guy was coming from, that's good for you because you don't want to feel what that guy was. And so it's, not even that many weeks ago, I remember. And now, keep in mind, now my cycles are so much better than they used to be because he was like, okay, I'm happy and now really, really heavy. Now I'm really, really heavy. Now they are like, I'm happy and I don't feel so good, which is a lot better than the heaviness I had before. But even then, like, it was a few weeks ago, at one point, I drove to the gym to train in judo. I walk up there. I have the gi in my hand. I walk up. I look at the mats. I look at the people. I turned around. I got back in my car and went back home because there was something there that I couldn't do it. I couldn't get on the mat. And it was like, why? You just drove for 20 minutes to get there. You wanted to do it because you think that it's going to make you feel better. I couldn't even take the step to walk on the mat.
Right, man.
And it was funny. I did that the next week. I did the same thing. And I'm about to leave. And then one of the guys kind of grabbed me and he's like, hey, why don't we just, if you don't want to train, let's not. But let's just play a little. Okay, just give me 5 minutes. So that, he got me on the mat and we started playing. And then I feel better. And then I felt a lot better. And then I'm like, oh, okay, that was helpful. That was good.
Yeah, right. Like sometimes all you need is that little push, but it's so hard to be able to judge in the moment if that's the right move or if you need to retract and go back to solitude. Like that's happened to me. I can't even tell you how many times. Like I've dealt with panic disorder and anxiety disorder from the past few years, and I'll be driving to a concert or going out somewhere to do something that I'm really excited about, and then you arrive at the destination and all of a sudden out of nowhere you're just filled with this angst, and it just pushes you to the edge of do I leave? What do I do? And you have to sort of make that weird judgment call because I think in many cases it is good to push yourself in those situations, but
except when it's not. Right?
Yeah, exactly, because it could just easily go the other way and make it just the worst experience of your life. So
yeah. So it's tricky. Generally speaking, yes, it's better to try than not, but there are exceptions.
Yeah. So outside of just general tragedy and innate biological components of depression and anxiety and all this, like what do you think are some of the main components contributing to the mental health problem in like Western culture today?
I think there's a monstrous degree of loneliness. Look at American society. One of the cool things about American society is that people can pack up and move across the country and reinvent themselves, go to a new school, get a new job, change everything. And that's cool on one side. On the other side, the problem is people can pack up and change everything at a drop of a dime, which means that there's no community. There's no family even. Family is a joke. It's like something that, you exchange 2 cards and you see each other for Christmas. That's not family. That's not, or even the way people are friends with one another. Most of people I know, they see their friends once in a really long time. Again, that's like very lonely lives, very isolated lives with such little connection to community, to friends, family, to anything beyond themselves, really. That doesn't seem to be very good for human. I don't think we're designed that way. I don't think it's, when you are raised and grow up as a species for thousands of generations in small-scale, tight-knit hunting and gathering group, you don't go from that to living this very solitary life without paying a heavy mental toll.
Yeah, I think about that often in my own life because I grew up in a pretty tight-knit religious community. So I was always surrounded by, a bunch of different families and friends, and there was like this weekly connection between us. You go to church Sunday, and maybe there was like a youth group Wednesday, and everybody barbecued Saturday or something, and that's just the way I grew up. And then when I eventually kind of came through that phase into late teenhood and young adulthood and all that, I really got that sense of just isolation, realizing there's sort of these old, almost archaic systems in place to keep communities tight-knit together. But the older you get and the more you start to, quote-unquote, follow your dreams and do whatever you want and you can move wherever you want, like you said, you lose all of that. And I feel like in the age of social media, we equate networking with community. It's like, how big is my network? How many people do I know? And those two things in my mind just are completely... they don't align at all. I mean, you can have a great network of people that you have their emails and connections, and it's helping you get to the next step of your career or whatever. And that's all great on its own, but that isn't a daily or weekly. There's no fire that we're gathering around and sharing stories on a weekly basis. There's no processing. Like when you think about just your own experience, like you just walked through a little bit of the tragedy that you went through and having to raise your daughter on your own. You think about in a 24-hour period how much emotional roller coasters you go through in that time, and how you want to be able to process that with somebody that you love. And to think that you can go days and weeks without really sitting down with one good friend or two or three good friends to go through that and vent it out, almost like therapy, but just friendship, like just communicating. There's none of that. And then before you know it, you're weeks and you're months into this isolation and feeling depressed or anxious, and you haven't talked to anybody. And now it's just so packed down that you don't even know what to do with it.
Totally. You're absolutely right. And I think that's one of the big diseases of Western culture that we haven't really figured out. Again, there's something awesome about the ability to be an individual. There's something awesome about the fact that you're not stuck in the tiny little community of people you grew up around, because some of those places are not always the best. At the same time, it comes at a price. So I think it's not a this or that kind of issue. Either you need to live around 3,000 people in the middle of a village in the mountains somewhere, or you need to be this jump from coast to coast constantly. I think the goal is to try to have both, to try to have the kind of more individual-driven life that we have, while at the same time not sacrificing some key elements. And I think that's the problem, that we have gone so far one way that we have lost the balance of what's needed in terms of creating your own tribe, creating your own community, creating your own contact,
Yeah. Well, you're someone, you live in Southern California, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's the classic geographical location where people from all over the world really move to Southern California to follow their dreams and their career paths and all that. And so many people I know personally have moved there, and they feel so alone. Like they're unable to not just connect with a community, but one of the common threads I hear is that it's really hard to find authentic relationships in Southern California because everybody is trying to move up a ladder. So it's always they're trying to get something out of you. So you kind of have to figure out like who you can get something from, and then how they can get something out of you. And there's a lot of this, I don't know what you want to call it. Just kind of consumer capitalist base of pushing your way through the career field in that location. So like since you've been there, what have been some of the, I guess, mechanisms or outlets that you've been able to create or find to harness this kind of community?
I think for me a lot, I made a switch at one point when I was like, I can't really depend on other people too much in terms of waiting for them to see the light, or not see the light, because that's it, more like to share my same priorities so that we can. So I'm going to do my thing. I'm going to do, I have certain things that I'm really interested in, martial arts being one of them, writing, whatever other things that I want to do for myself. And hopefully, in the process of my own path, I can find like-minded people, I can meet like-minded people who can click with those priorities. Now, that doesn't work. It does work because it gives you a mission. You have a very clear sense of what you're trying to achieve, so that, if you put me... I could never be bored, for example. There's no way boredom, if you give me 10,000 years to live, I don't think I would be bored for 5 minutes, right? Because there's so many things that I'm driven to, interested in, I want to do, I want to get done, all of that. On the other hand, that's still different from, and I've met a lot of people that I can click with, that I have a good time with, who are nice human beings, who we probably would be friends if we actually spent more time together.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the sad thing is that they probably think of me as a great friend or something. And I'm just like, I mean, yes and no. Yeah, potentially. Yes, whatever we have is great, but it's just not much. And
Right.
I think of the issue is that relationships are also measured in time. They are not just measuring quality. They are also measured in, day-to-day life, not just we meet each other once every 2 months and it's great. It's like, yeah, that's not the same thing. It's a good thing, but it's not the same thing. Yeah. Which is why people crave desperately some of those places. Like, think about martial arts, for example. Not just you train in such and such an art and, you feel better because of endorphins or the relationship with your body or everything else. But just the fact that you go whatever many times a week to a place where other people who are into the same thing are there and you see the same faces. And granted, you're not choosing to see them, you're choosing to go to train in this art, but they are there too. And it becomes kind of maybe not intentional, but it does become a community.
Yeah.
And in itself is helpful. Now, it's far from my idea of what community would be, but it's way better than not having it.
Yeah, it's one aspect of having a tribe. It's one aspect of creating, a team of like-minded people with similar goals that it does unify you on some level. And that's really, really interesting. Like, with all that you just said, how much do you think about this in reference to your daughter? Like, do you think about her growing up in this world and like what means or methods that she'll have to face, like the older she gets and she has to kind of surf her way through this strange landscape?
Sure. And I mean, like, for example, I wanted to live, there's a place not too far from Los Angeles, maybe about 2 to 3 hours away in the mountains, Big Bear. Mm-hmm. I love the place. It's beautiful. It puts me in a good mood every time I'm there. And I kind of would badly want to live there. But realistically, don't get me wrong, there are some nice people around, but realistically, it's not the kind of environment where I would want. I mean, now she's still 8. She's about to turn 9 years old. Sure, she could still have fun there. But when you're a teenager, you probably want to shoot yourself there, because other than natural beauty, what's around you is not particularly stimulating on many other levels. And so, yeah, I do think about that in terms of, I'm sure we could have a great time, but she needs more than just her family. She needs more than, and some places are more conducive than others. I mean, it's more like some places are worse than others because I don't see great places for that. I see places that are less crappy, at least in US.
Yeah, definitely. There's a sort of a degree of it is what you make it. I mean, if you move somewhere, you can create these opportunities depending on how outgoing and how available you are to seek them out. But then to some degree, like a place like LA or New York City, they're just these hotbeds for consumerism and just career jumping, and it does make, I think, a lot of the chances to create authentic community a little bit more difficult.
It becomes a vicious cycle because your life sucks because you're lonely and you're working all the time, but at least you have some money. So what do? You buy yourself something cool that makes you feel a little bit better about the fact that your life sucks. Right. But of course, spending means that you have to make even more money, which means spending even more time doing something that makes you miserable, which makes you more miserable, and then you want to buy more stuff. And then you have to work harder, which then makes you want to... It's this vicious cycle where it's very hard to get out.
Yeah, I think about that all the time with just small purchases. I mean, I'm not someone, I'm at my means, maybe a little bit above my means. So even when a purchase comes around, like a new TV or a new video game or a new guitar, whatever it might be, when I look at the money, it's like, okay, this is only a couple $100 or maybe it's $1,000. If I save up, I can afford to do this. But then I think about the change that brings and how if I save that money, I could be putting it toward potentially, a new big move or an experience that would be way more fulfilling than just kind of this additional item that is growing material, whatever. But yeah, man, I wanted to ask you if you're interested in talking about this at all, because I know it's been like a little bit of a hot topic lately, at least in internet culture. Have you read anything or kind of delved into this whole quote-unquote intellectual dark web recently?
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
yeah. I don't know, man. It's like most of the people were touted as public intellectuals. I'm just so not interested in what they have to say.
Yes.
I find it's weird. I find this doesn't apply to everybody, of course, but a lot of the so-called public intellectuals, if you just forget what they are saying, just look at their faces.
Mm-hmm.
I see people who are either seriously constipated or something equivalent on an emotional level. Like there's something there that is like, come on, if you push hard enough, I think you can get it out.
Right.
And it just, I don't know, man. I don't see. I tend to be very like my mind is much slower than my instincts.
Mm-hmm.
Usually my instincts have an answer quickly, and then my mind will eventually catch on and give me reasons why I felt that way. So to me, before I even listen to somebody's ideas, I look at their face and see what I feel when I listen to them talk or to the tone of their voice. To forget the content, let's start with just all these other clues that tell me something about who this person is. And I find nothing interesting about the overwhelming majority of people who are touted as public intellectuals. I think one time, I guess I was in a funky mode, I mentioned, I think I even titled an episode like that, how I'm considerably more interested in Kim Kardashian's ass than in the collective contribution of public intellectuals. And I don't even care about Kim Kardashian's ass that much because she's weird in her own way,
Yeah.
I just don't care. I don't find it. And again, somebody else listen to them and they can find the tools to make their life better. Good for you. I have nothing against it. If it does help you make your life, if it makes you make your life better is a funky concept. If it makes you a kinder human being, if it makes you nicer to your neighbor, if it makes you, then I'm all for it. May not work for me, but whatever. If it works for you, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't see it. I see a lot of stale thoughts that I have a really hard time to see how they would bring joy to anybody. But again, I'm not them, so whatever. If they bring joy to you, good for you.
Yeah, it's so refreshing to hear you say that because I've followed really, really closely the whole Joe Rogan podcast, the whole Joe Rogan experience since 2011. And his podcast really, it launched a whole new world, including you, figures like you, who I found and was so fascinated by. And within the past few years, I'm really thankful for a lot of the communicators that he's had on that have led me into different pathways of thought. But it really seems like as this whole quote-unquote intellectual dark web has developed, it's really this way for one, they're creating an entire new tribe. This is like a whole new, it's like a tribe that prides themselves on not calling themselves a tribe, but now they have. So it's super weird in that way. And every one of the opinions that are espoused within this group are so, they just lack so much nuance. And it's weird even communicating this idea to you because you're someone, I would call you a public intellectual in the sense that you're an expert in various fields. Even though, I guess by trade, you're not technically a historian, you're a history professor, right? But I can't even imagine how many historians have contacted you over your work that you've been doing because you've done so much work in the academic field because of this. And I've heard you have conversations from, obviously from guys like Joe Rogan who are a little bit more libertarian leaning to guys like Michael Brooks, who's more socialist leaning. And you hold your ideas in an open hand and you're able to see the complexities within government policies and social issues. And when I look at most of these guys in this so-called intellectual dark web, it just feels like they're all rallying around this campfire of anti-SJWs and anti-third wave feminism and anti-Islamist or Muslim extremist rhetoric. And it just seems so, I guess if someone's listening to them or following them and it's getting them interested in a topic, I guess there's an argument to be made that it's beneficial in that way. But I've seen, if internet culture is any indication of it, it seems like the internet culture that they've been harnessing is creating this downward shift of just trolls and really just spiteful people that aren't helping this whole global polarization issue that we're in right now at all.
Well, I think you said right there something that should clue one in on what the problem is right there. You said anti this, anti that, anti the other.
Right.
And I think that's the problem. If your whole shtick is being anti somebody, it's like, maybe you're right. Maybe these people they are criticizing are complete idiots, but that doesn't tell me you're smart or there's anything even remotely valuable about what you bring up. Pointing to somebody who's an idiot and saying, look, there's an idiot, that's not exactly the work of a genius, you know?
Right.
It's like, and don't get me wrong, we all do it. If we see something stupid, we'll say, hey, that's stupid. But that can be most of your production, what you are known for, what you are. To me, is like, what do you create? I mean, okay, let's say you identify a true problem, and there's a whole debate about how much of this is true or not. But let's assume that you're right, and that is a problem, and those are bad ideas or bad people or whatever. What interests me is, what's the solution you're proposing? What's the alternative that you're proposing? Because criticizing is easy, and creating is hard. And so I'm interested in, my benchmark is, whatever idea somebody pushes, can it help elevate the quality of life for as many people as possible? Well, if it's a yes, then I'm interested. Otherwise, that to me is what it's about. Pure critical intelligence, the intelligence that sits back and break apart what somebody else is doing, it's a part of the game. Like, what interests me the most is what you do that's exciting, what you do that help people live better lives. And again, some of it is subjective because, of course, the same thing that I'll look at and go, "Bo, I don't get it. That seemed like crap to me," will get somebody really excited and help them. And which is why I'm not saying there's this absolute standard that somebody's either a net positive or a net negative in some way. But from my point of view, I'm not interested in purely critical intelligence. I'm interested in creative intelligence. Actually, I'm not even interested in intelligence, period. I'm interested in, for somebody's IQ, somebody's so-called intelligence really doesn't interest me that much. I'm interested in, if I'm around you, do you make me laugh? Do you put me in a good mood? Do I find myself always with a smile living an interaction with you? If it's a yes, then I don't really care what we are talking about or how many books you have read or the size of your vocabulary. Who cares? You help make life happier for me. That is worth to me 10,000 times more than some really deep but stale discussion. Depth should produce results. If it doesn't produce tangible results, then intelligence is just a masturbatory game for nerds with too much time on their hand. There's no point.
Right, man. Yeah, it's like the difference between friends who get together on a Friday night and all they do is talk shit on the people that aren't in the room, and they'll be like, oh, Trump this, oh, Brexit that, and they just complain, versus the people who get together, they talk about, what are some ways we can move this conversation forward? What are some things we can be doing right now to project, whether it's a small social issue or a personal issue, like, let's move. I mean, it's so easy. It's not just easy to deconstruct everything, but it's what sells. And I think that's the scary thing about this whole new, I shouldn't say scary, but I guess discomforting aspect of this whole intellectual dark web movement is that you have these figures like a Dave Rubin or a Jordan Peterson, and they are making tens of thousands of dollars on Patreon a month. And the people that are supporting them, they aren't people, like, their whole shtick is individualism. Let's focus on the individual, like, be your best self, etc. Except that's not why they're supporting these people. They're supporting these people because they put out consistent content on a weekly basis that deconstructs the quote-unquote other that they're against. It's all about, okay, we've created the other, our enemy, which is the left, basically. It's the super ambiguous term that umbrellas so many different ideologies and groups of people, and it just isn't helpful at all. I mean, it's just, there's an ancient Hebraic saying that says, any old donkey can tear down a barn, but it takes a real special one to build one. Because
exactly.
there's just not enough people, and I fear that there's so much attraction. Like guys like Jordan Peterson are like a magnet, and people are so attracted to the polarization that he creates. And I had followed him. I've watched, I can't even tell you how many of his lectures from way early on, before he, I would say right after he was on Rogan's podcast the first time. And so he was still not super famous, but he was getting attention. And to see the sort of content that he focused on prior to all this, where he was more introspective in this whole Joseph Campbell, Carl Jung mythology type of thing, which I'm actually pretty interested in to some degree. That's a huge aspect, and I think you are too. I mean, you wrote that whole
Joseph
book.
Campbell was great. Joseph Campbell was brilliant.
Exactly, and that was his whole shtick before this. And then as soon as he started getting more and more into the public eye, that shifted to now every single talk or YouTube video is about Marxism and how the SJWs are taking over, and it's just become. I want to talk about it more with people because it's one of these things where so many people, I feel like on the right, are posing it as some kind of solution, as if he is the, people like him or people like Ben Shapiro are these, they're like these voices of reason, whereas to me, they've become. I never really followed Ben Shapiro's work that much prior to the past year or two of paying attention to him politically, but when I listen to them speak, they just sound like political pundits. They don't sound like, to your point, they don't sound like they're contributing any tangible solutions, and I don't see them reaching across the aisle at all to create actual debate and discussion with their opponents in a fair light.
And I feel, I completely agree with you. I think it's the lack of solutions. I mean, it's very easy to. Why is it that most revolutions fail? Because it's very easy that we all agree that these particular tyrants suck. It's easy to build unity that way. It's very hard to build unity on a creative solution. Because A, the creative solution has to be brilliant. B, has to be, there are so many conditions you have to satisfy. Whereas agreeing on something that's stupid, that's like the minimum, it's like the lowest hanging fruit possible to shoot for. So that to me is not a sign of particular brilliance of anybody, regardless of whether they are right or wrong. Okay? Because I mean, in some cases, worse of all is if your whole shtick is being critical and on top of it you're wrong, well, then you're just that's dead.
Yeah.
If you're right, it's like, okay, so what? And I think that's also the problem with the other side, that like politically speaking, for example, I don't like anybody because I don't, the same game gets to be played by all sides of like the problem is always the other guys and you have 10,000 reasons why the other guys are idiots.
Right.
But when it comes to actual solutions, it's like, you're not that much better, It's like what you're proposing is, if your whole thing is, well, I'm not as bad as them, and even if you are right, it's like, well, that's not exactly, wow, what a great call. I'm so excited about following your ideas. You're not as bad as this complete idiot. That's awesome. It's like, that's not a solution either. So I feel like, that's kind of part of the problem, that people spend way, way, way too much time focusing on what doesn't work and not enough time on focusing, okay, what do we do about it? Or what can I do that contributes to somebody's life in a good way that makes them, like even, for example, with History on Fire, one of my frustrations with academic learning is that it tends to be really dry and there's very little connection to life. So to me, when I talk about history and History on Fire, I like to do it in a way that's exciting, is not just an analysis of something, it's also something that will give people some awesome storytelling, stories about people that are inspiring in some way, or stories that are exciting, or things that bring some color to people's daily life. That to me, if I can do that, if I can make somebody smile, if I can bring color to their life, if I can bring some sources of inspiration or moments of enthusiasm, that's a positive. That's not just a lack of a negative. That's not just saying, hey, I'm not as stupid as the other guy. It's an actual bringing something that's useful to people. So I'm way more interested in that aspect. And then, whether somebody's solutions are valuable or not, well, that's your own individual judgment call, right?
Yeah.
Somebody, hey, look, there are these rules to live your life for. And I'm like, yeah, they don't work for me. I don't really see the appeal, but whatever. They work for you. That's great. At least it's an attempt at a solution. It may not be a good one, but, good or bad solution, there is a little bit of subjectivity to it, but not even trying. I mean, like, for example, you mentioned Peterson and Shapiro, right?
Mm-hmm.
Peterson tries. I disagree with his solutions. I think his solutions are terrible, but at least there's a good, honest effort of these are things that you could try to do to make your life better.
Mm-hmm.
A guy like Shapiro doesn't even bother doing that. Like, he literally, his whole shtick, morning through night, is, can you believe those people on the other side, how stupid and evil they are?
Yeah.
That's just sad, man. That's like, what are you doing with your life? That's your whole thing. So, there are different degrees. They bug me in different ways, I guess. But I don't know. There are really, when I think about it, there are. I don't know. I was listening before we started the podcast. I was listening to Duncan Trussell.
Oh, he's the best.
He's hilarious, man. He was. I was actually, check this out. Like, Duncan is the only man on earth I can think of who I sat down and started playing this collection of his commercials that somebody did. He was doing these commercials for Short Design T-shirts, right?
Yeah.
3 hours of like 2 minutes from each episode of him pitching Short Design, and he's so damn funny. He's so creative. Yep. His imagery is so wild that Duncan Trussell doing a commercial bring more value to life, in my opinion, than books and books and books written by other people.
Right, right.
And if you want to go in a less wild comedic, and if I listen to Dan Carlin, I find Dan Carlin way of thinking, he's a master of nuance. He does help tremendously, in my opinion, with really helping people to think critically, helping to think in terms, and by critical in this case, I wasn't meant as criticizing somebody, as I mean as actually thinking on their feet, of thinking with nuance, of thinking with a sense of balance, of approaching complex topics without trying to oversimplify everything, by making you look at the same thing from many different viewpoints. That's a work of genius. That's great stuff. It shouldn't even be genius. It should be pretty basic, actually. But considering how dry the public landscape is, that is complete genius, because very few people are doing it. So, you mentioned people like these, to me, are contributing enormously to improving people's lives. Even when you mention Joe, Joe has allowed, Joe Rogan has, through his platform, has publicized ideas, practices, concepts that millions of people have benefited from, whether it is from flotation tanks or jiu-jitsu or whatever the hell. He was able to verbalize ideas that have helped people tremendously, right?
Yeah.
So those are the kind of contributions that I'm interested in. Intellectual, mental masturbation who pat itself on the back about, hey, look at those bad guys and I'm calling them out, pointless. I'm completely uninterested in that stuff.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. I mean, someone like Joe, I've been listening to him for so many years now. I've had to catch myself because I have to become highly critical of how he presents ideas because how much it's affected my own worldview. So
Sure.
I have to constantly be evaluating how much of my own thoughts have been affected by how many of his thoughts. And in turn, it can create like a sort of cynicism sometimes toward him, but he's impacted my life and the lives of so many millions of people. When you come across like some YouTube troll who's commenting on one of his videos, just this sucks, Rogan sucks. It's laughable because how many individuals he's affected, through just shaping this open worldview that you're talking about. And I think it's just so important. I mean, like you mentioned guys like Carlin and obviously Duncan, and I really do think that the importance of figures like them and like yourself is that it is a combination of this humor, entertainment, but then at the same time being able to look at all these issues through this nuanced lens. And that is just it's such a shame that a show like yours or a show like Duncan's will never be as big as someone like Jordan Peterson's, because when you ride this party line, it's focusing more on the negative, it's focusing more on the hate, and it's focusing more on what's easy for people to digest. So it creates this easy platform for people just to latch onto, and it really is just a shame, because I think there's so many opportunities for people when they get to that sort of, whatever you want to call it, that level of fame where they have all these eyes on them. You know, they have an opportunity to really change public discourse. And I think if you asked someone like a Jordan Peterson or a Ben Shapiro, do you want to help public discourse? I think they'd all say yes. It's just that their way of doing it, like you said, it's doubling down on this constant straw man where you mentioned before, you know, each side has their points. You know, there's the left has valid criticisms of the right, and the right has valid criticisms of the left, and there's circumstances that definitely warrant criticism, but it's just the fact that they hyper focus on these issues as if they make up the whole. And that's what the problem is, you know, like they don't look at each issue when it comes to policy, and they don't look at each issue when it comes to geopolitics or the history of that area or the history of this people group. You know, there's a lot of talk in the media about identity politics and how it's become such a left-right issue, whereas in my mind, it's not an either or. It's, yes, we should be focusing more and more on individuals, but simultaneously we can't ignore the history of minority groups, you know, that are in these situations, especially in the U.S., where people are sort of trying to brush over the history of racism, the history of sexism, and the history of all these prejudices. And it becomes this, oh, well, if you use identity politics, you're a leftist. Or, oh, if you're anti-identity politics, you must be right-wing. Whereas it's more like, no, guys, we need to just actually focus on each issue for what it is and how the policies affect minorities and how individually we approach each person within these communities.
Yeah, I think even any discussion where people are like, the left, the right, is like, I'm done already. It's like, I feel like, come on, man. It's like, life is a little more complicated than that. I feel like it's giving in to this ideological position, first assuming that there is such a monolithic block as the left or the right, where usually it's a lot more complicated than that. Second, assuming that one side has all the fault and everybody else must be. It's funny, it's like in Italy, there's this guy Berlusconi who won like 3 gazillion elections, who's kind of like the equivalent of Trump. He's this really kind of crass, really weird and disturbing figure in some ways, but people keep electing it, right? And it's like, why? This guy is such an idiot. Why would anybody elect him? Then you look at his opponents, and you're like, okay, all you're telling me is that you're not him. That's the only thing you point for you. It's like, you're not putting anything even remotely interesting or solutions that actually work. All you're telling me is that you're not that idiot. And of course, the idiot at least is entertaining in a weird, disturbing kind of way. The way like a Trump is entertaining is like, okay, well, at least it's, while you burn down the universe, at least you have a laugh because it's so weird. And it's more than you can say about the opponents. And so that gets sad because it's like you're stuck with these alternatives that are not really alternatives. You have like, do you want this brand of idiots or this other brand of idiots? It's like, how about we stop arguing about which brand of idiots we support or we oppose, and we just stop being idiots? Because that would be a nice step, you know, that would be interesting. And I feel that ideology often gets to, it's about my side versus yours. It's about, I need to score a point. I need to prove that I'm interested in what works. I don't care where it comes from. It can be a liberal idea, it can be a conservative idea, it can be a whatever idea. It's like, show me that it works, show me that it helps people. Okay, then I'm interested. Otherwise, what are we talking about? You know, it's like, I have no allegiance to any ideology, to any economic system, to anything, really. I have an allegiance to what makes life happier. That I have a strong allegiance to.
Right, yeah, I love that. You know, I feel, you know, when people start talking about political systems, I I don't turn off because I am fascinated by the differences between, systems like capitalism versus Marxism, but to a degree, it really is so much just rearranging the furniture when you change systems. It's like, okay, we are trying this system out for 100 years or 200 years or 500 years. It's going to fall, and then we're going to start a new system. And if people present these systems like they are the end-all, be-all solution, we need to have pure capitalism, or we need to revert now back to pure Marxism because we've gone too far. And it really is this political polarizing climate that we're living in, where people they feel they have to tug to the first, because it's how you negotiate. You can't negotiate from the middle, so you have to pull really hard from the left or really hard from the right in order to get anything done. But I mean, you do have an interesting vantage point in all this because you are an Italian immigrant. So have you had any specific experiences or thoughts on the rhetoric of Trump in this era, or the country as a whole, like with the policies and just the general conversations around immigration?
I think is one of the, like, you tend to see this rise around the world of this in the bad cases seriously dictatorial, in the more mellow cases just this kind of like strong man who appeals to an idealized past in the Make America Great Again kind of stuff, where the vibe is, why do people keep going for these guys? Well, a lot of it is we live in a world that's changing so incredibly fast, where most people are lonely and miserable, where everything that was true when they were growing up as kids, now the whole world changes every 10 years in dramatic fashion where it's hardly recognizable. People are scared. People are confused. They need somebody to look strong. Never mind whether they are or they aren't, but at least play the part well, play the father figure role. I am strong, I know what to do, it's very black and white, we just need to oppose the bad guys, support this good stuff, and everything is going to be great again. It's a very appealing fairy tale. Now, none of that is real, but you can see why people dig it, especially when the alternatives are very poor. Right. At least it's kind of like, if you look at the history of most weird phenomenon that when you look at them from the outside is like, why would anybody support this? You can sort of see why it was happening. It's because he was fulfilling a need. Now, most of the time he wasn't fulfilling a real need. He was fulfilling, again, you're selling a fairy tale, not a reality. But it's a fairy tale that appeals to people, that makes sense. Like the whole immigration thing, again, it's funny because on one end you have the build a wall, the dangerous immigrants coming in. On the other side, you have the ones who are arguing, all immigrants are great, net positive, everything is good. And it's like, it's never that easy, man. It's never that black and white. It's how about we look at case by case? But that doesn't make for a good slogan. That's not something that you can easily bring forth in a quick, this is what we're going to do, and this is the perfect solution. It's a lot of tinkering, of going back and forth, of figuring out the exact right balance and where it gets to be too much and poisonous. But, even like the whole immigration thing, the whole thing is a joke, right? Because nobody, not the left, not the right, has any interest in actually tackling the issue. Because if it was really an issue that they want to tackle, there's a real simple solution to the problem of so-called illegal immigration. If you want to enforce those laws, you do not enforce them by building a wall. There's always going to be a way around it.
Right.
You enforce it by fining the living hell out of anybody hiring somebody who's undocumented. Why would you do that? Is because, well, of course, then if you don't have the thing that brings people in a country, which is economic prosperity and opportunities and jobs, then people stop coming. But as long as there's that prize on the other side of the wall, people will find a way to get to it.
Right.
And why is it that no politicians want to do that? Is because, well, those are powerful lobbies. It's like, try to do that and see how long you get your donations from the agricultural industry or the meatpacking industry or 10,000 other industry will leave thanks to illegal immigration.
Yeah, we love to exploit illegal immigrants, for our own capitalist gains.
Of course. And I mean, the whole thing is, it's a lot easier to talk about the bad immigrant from across the border who's terrible and we shouldn't have them. And, that's an easy straw man. That's a complete. But if you really think that it's a problem, then there would be a somewhat easy solution. Now, it's a whole other debate whether we think that's a good solution or not, but there would be. But nobody wants to do it because that would actually mess with some serious economic interest within the country that no politician wants to mess with. Mm-hmm. So the whole immigration debate is pure posturing. There's no real effort to actually trying to tackle it. It's just a way to win supporters on the left or supporters on the right. That's it. Nobody's even bothering with something that would actually work.
Yeah, I'm with you, man. Like, have you considered at all starting some kind of YouTube show or some? I mean, I know you talk politics a lot on the Drunken Taoist, but the ideas that you're presenting and all this, seeking out nuance, refusing to fall into these ideological traps between left and right dichotomies. This is stuff that I'm starting to feel more and more so as we're seeing these newer movements arise of, like, quote-unquote, the intellectual dark web or the alt-right, for example, or the quote-unquote regressive left. There's all these sort of new terms that have been being coined the past several years of groups rising up and latching onto ideology, whereas I look at a lot of what you've been saying is showing people how to break out of those mindsets. Have you thought at all about, like, maybe starting some kind of program or some platform to really get more of these ideas out? Because I really do, I feel personally that it's super enlightening and something that's really, it doesn't exist that many places right now on the internet.
Yeah, I was kind of bummed out when Dan Carlin quit.
I know.
Doing Common Sense, because it was like one of the few podcasts that was hitting the nail on the head when it came to political worldview and things like that. I toyed with the notion. I mean, one of the problems is that I'm way overstretched, right? Yeah. I way more things than I have time for already. So clearly the idea of adding things to the pile is not like, oh, Jesus, I already can't handle what I have in front of me. Now I'm going to handle more. I have toyed a little bit with the notion. There's Daryl Cooper, who runs the Martyr Made podcast. He did by far the most brilliant thing I've ever listened to regarding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
I just saw about this. I downloaded it for that exact reason. I haven't listened to it yet, though. I heard it was awesome.
Daryl is a genius, right? Complete, disturbed genius. He's crazy in a lot of ways, but he's a complete genius. I like him as a person. But so one thing that we are toying with was the notion of doing something together along those lines. And it would be interesting, too, because Daryl, at least in, I definitely don't categorize in that way, but at least in public discourse, is considered considerably more, if you are to go on a left or right spectrum, he's considered a little bit more on the right.
Yeah.
Right? So it's like, that would be, I don't consider myself the left by any stretch of the imagination, because when I look at what the left often is, it makes me throw up, but it makes me throw up 10 times more when I look at what considered the right. So, it would be interesting because we're not exactly on the dots in terms of where we stand on some issues. We do have different bags. So I would be interested in seeing if doing something with him could work. Could be something where there's dialogue, there's more than one opinion, there's a nuanced way to approach topics, starting from two different viewpoints. And yet I do get the feeling that, like, anytime I talk with Daryl, we end up agreeing at the end. And it's kind of like, wait, we're supposed to come from different places here. What just happened here?
Right.
And so it's interesting. And even when we don't fully agree, we're like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That is the other side of the equation that I'm discounting a little bit, but you're right, and vice versa. So it would be fun. I don't know, Daryl first is hard to pin down himself because he works like a dog as well. It's tricky for me to tackle new projects, but it would be interesting. Could be fun. I mean, one of the things that I would do so is not make it specifically just about politics. It would be probably politics and culture.
Right.
Because one of the other problems that I feel is that the political discourse, to a large degree, it's kind of, how can I put it? It's Frank Zappa had this famous quote where he said something along those lines of like how politics is the entertainment division of the military-industrial complex.
Oh, I love that.
It's like, at the end of the day, the things that people argue about are not where the real political game is played. It's like abortion or, gay rights or whatever the hell. Real power players use these things purely as smokescreens for the business they are doing behind the scenes. And the business they are doing behind the scenes is not ideological, it's about money. And it's only about money. So it's one of the things where, we can talk ideological things or ideas from here to forever, but the reality of politics is that it's not about ideas. It's about who gets the spoils and who gets to divide them among their followers. That's more where it's at. The ideas are the little theater that you do for the monkeys so they are happy and they can argue with each other about abortion should be legal, no, should be illegal. It's like, that's the stuff that you throw at them because it's entertaining to the people and you let them play and get distracted from the fact that you are raping them all in the meantime by just robbing the living hell out of everything that can be robbed.
Right.
So in that sense, my feeling is that as much as it's useful to discuss political ideas, there's a place where it doesn't matter what a brilliant concept you come up with. At the end of the day, you're never going to be in a place where you can dramatically shift it. So there's a part of me that feels that while it's important to understand politics, is also the amount of energy you put into it versus what you get back is not a very good trade.
Mm.
And so in that sense, I'm interested also in the cultural aspect, in the talking about things like, for example, we were saying earlier, the individuality versus community. How do we create more community in modern American society? Like, there may be some political aspects to that, but it's more about life, in a sense, outside of just what happens, how does the Senate vote or something. It's more about other aspects as well. And so my take would be, if we were to do something like that, it would be a more cultural / politics. It wouldn't be 100% politics.
Oh, I love that. Please do it. Because I feel like this is so much attached to people. They'll focus on an issue like a police shooting. And they look at it through the lens of racism in America today, and it becomes this black and white thing where it's almost looked at through just the lens of this one video, and now people on the right are saying, oh, we need more context. This is one case. It's not actually an issue. It's just this one case. And then people on the left are looking at it like, no, this is more institutional. There's more context to it here. And I think it goes beyond that. It goes beyond just the context of what's happening right there in the video. If you really want to understand the issue, you have to go back decades and centuries, and you have to tell stories, and you have to understand how these systems got put into place and the policies behind them and the people that were in power and all these different aspects that are so difficult and time consuming for people to do, whereas it's so much easier just to click on a link from a website that you like and say, oh, this baker is refusing to bake a gay couple a cake. They're just wrong. Like, it's just wrong. Like, this is black and white. Whereas it takes true integrity and way more time to dig into the context and the policies that surround all of these political issues. It's not just I'm a politician and I stand for this policy. It's no, I'm a politician. I take money from this group and I've been campaigning for 20 years, through these stances, and you have to look at the history, which someone like you or like a Dan Carlin, you do that so well, where you go into these stories, these old stories, and you extrapolate not just the surface level current events or events surrounding the stories, but you extrapolate the details and the little things that a typical history book or an article wouldn't pick up on. You're showing the whole picture the best you can, and I think that really is it's missing in the conversation today. So that would be amazing if you were able to pull something like that off, because it really is. Once I was with you, same there, where when Dan Carlin stopped doing the common sense. I have a lot of podcasts I listen to. I listen to a guy like Robert Wright, and I think Robert is trying really hard to have people from all over the political spectrum on his show to, push back and create ideas. And then there's other people that lean a little bit left, and there's people that lean a little bit right. And it's great to hear people that are super intelligent and great communicators on these ideas, but it doesn't fill that hole where I think most people, if you want to get them outside of that partisan bubble, they really need to understand more history and just more context to a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and I think, I hope Dan decide to do it again. I had a conversation with him, like, before he released, not the very last, the one before. We talked on the phone for a really long time, and in fact, the episode then I was listening, I'm like, oh, that's pretty much where our conversation was going. And he was just feeling like, what's the point? It's like nuance gets drowned in the middle of people yelling at each other. And I think he discounts the impact he's having on people. He doesn't see it. He doesn't understand it. I think there's more of an audience for that than he thinks there is.
Yeah.
And but he's feeling like, I got other stuff to do, forget it. This is a losing battle. And I disagree, but I completely get it. On the other hand, on the inspiring stuff, earlier you were saying about, things that are super popular or that are not necessarily the coolest things around and vice versa. Well, when I look at like what happened with Dan, I think it's super inspiring. When I look at the fact that Hardcore History got to be downloaded by literally millions of people, that's awesome. That makes me feel considerably, because of course, it's kind of like a truism that is like a lot of the hyper popular stuff tend to be trash, but not always. Sometimes there's stuff that breaks through that is very popular and is also really good. And I think Hardcore History is a perfect example of that. Even what Joe has done, right? It's like there are some of these people who have managed to break through to a huge level, and they are brilliant. And I think Dan is, exhibit A in that regard.
Yeah, I think it's easier for a guy like Dan who and just like you, he inspired you to do your show, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, it's easy for guys like Dan or yourself to, I think, get more discouraged at the whole sort of facade of this landscape on social media, because it's the loudest, most polarizing, annoying voices that are the most prevalent on social media, whether it's YouTube or Twitter or Reddit or wherever. And, I think a lot of the people, I can at least speak to the people in my own life, a lot of the people who I find the most sensible and loving, and the people that are really actively trying to make these changes, they've migrated off of social media for the most part, because like Dan, they can't seem to find their footing or where they belong without getting constantly shouted down and just emotionally drained from putting themselves out there. And I think the landscape of social media lends itself best to, if you're on one team and you're against another team, and you can create an echo. It's been said so many times at this point, it sounds redundant, but you really do create an echo chamber. And through that, I think a lot of these voices in the middle who would be yearning for a Dan Carlin Common Sense podcast right about now, like the one I know he just put out that one sort of basically saying, this is why I'm not putting out more episodes. But I think those people, they're still there. They're just not as loud, and they're just not as active on social media. And it's tough, because it's hard to compete for ideas in this way online. And that, I tell people, it's like, if you're not doing it online or through a podcast, where are you doing it? It's not like there's public squares for debate anymore. Everything is either on a podcast or YouTube or some show. So it's a tough time to be in for someone who wants more nuance in their worldview.
Yeah, for sure. It's most definitely tricky business, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try.
Yeah, definitely. Well, man, Daniele, you've been so gracious with your time, and I really, really appreciate all this. It's been a fascinating conversation. So just to sign off, is there anything you're working on right now for people to anticipate? I'll link your show notes and your ats and all that in the podcast. But is there anything that you're working on now, or any closing stuff you want to include?
No, I'm just going to go back to the dungeon where they keep me chained to work on that History of Fire episode, because it's a lot of research. So, Yeah, I need to have this sort of self-imposed deadline of trying to release every month, which is really hard with some of those episodes. But so back to the dungeon I go.
You said 200 hours an episode, right?
Sometimes, I mean, not every time, but yeah, a lot of the time, yes. It's that's about a good average, which is basically a full-time job, except I don't have full-time hours to dedicate to it, so it's a little insane.
Well, man, I really appreciate all the work you do, and I know there's dozens of people in my life that feel the same way. So thanks so much for the time tonight, and I'll catch you around online.
Thank you so much, and please let me know when this episode comes out. I'll make sure to retweet and all the good stuff.
Awesome, man. Thanks again.
Have a great one.